Magandang hapon mga kapuso, ako po si Kate Burbano at live tayo ngayon sa Ask Away, the GMA News Q&A para sa isa na namang edisyon ng ating pag-uusapan. Para sa araw na ito, pag-uusapan natin ang legalidad ng paghihiwalay ng mga mag-asawa sa Pilipinas. At para sagutin ang ating mga katanungan, makasama natin si Atty. Paolo Abarquez para sagutin ang ating mga tanong. Okay, Attorney, ayon sa Family Code of the Philippines, there are 3 ways para maghiwalay ang mag-asawa sa Pilipinas. We have legal separation, we have annulment, and then the declaration of nullity of marriage.
Yes.
So can you give us the definition of those 3 and how do they differ from one another?
Okay. Sige, I'll start with declaration of nullity of marriage.
Okay.
Declaration of nullity of marriage is a way for parties, husbands and wives, to separate, meaning the marriage is not valid from the beginning. That's the proper definition of a void marriage.
Yes.
That's why you apply for declaration of nullity. Now, that occurs when the husband and the wife did not satisfy all the essential and all the requisites for a valid marriage. Now, the other ground is for annulment. In annulment, there's actually a marriage that occurs between the husband and the wife, but the consent of either of the spouses was not acquired properly. It's basically impaired. So, because of that, you can actually ask the court to nullify the marriage. Pero there's a time limit for that. Usually, it's within 5 years from the marriage, you have to file the case for annulment. If that period lapses, then you can no longer file that. And then the other one you mentioned is legal separation.
Yes.
Legal separation, there is a valid marriage, but there are circumstances that happened after the marriage which entitles either of the parties to file for an action to live separately from each other. So some of the grounds here are repeated physical violence of either spouses, either spouse becomes an alcoholic or a drug addict, among others. So there's a valid marriage, but somebody does something which becomes a ground now to live separately.
Okay, so given those 3 options for a married couple to be separated, do you think that it's enough to give full relief for the couple who wants to be separated?
Well, full relief probably is a relative term, no? Because it depends really on the parties what they want to achieve when they file these cases.
Yes.
Now, I forgot to mention earlier that one of the grounds for declaring a marriage void is also this ground they call psychological incapacity of either parties. No, usually when parties file a case in court, they usually ask the court to declare the marriage void so that they can remarry again. If that is the relief they're looking for, then they would have to show the court that they have sufficient grounds to either declare the marriage void or they have grounds to get annulment that I mentioned earlier within the time period. Now, if the parties cannot prove to the court that they have these grounds present, they cannot ask for the court to declare their marriage void and for them to remarry. So that's where the problem lies, because if their grounds are only for legal separation, they cannot really ask the court to declare their marriage void, and they cannot remarry. All the court that can do is they will allow the parties to live separately.
Okay, so let's focus naman on annulment.
Okay.
Like, what qualifies for an annulment? What are the grounds? So, isa-isahin natin.
Sige. The first ground actually for annulment, in this case, there's a marriage that occurs, but there's just a problem with the consent. No?
Yes.
The first one is in cases where a person, one of the parties, married between the ages of 18 to 21 but did not acquire parental consent.
Okay.
So,
minor.
So parang hindi na siya, not a minor anymore, no?
Pero,
but what the law requires is that if you marry and your age is between 18 to 21, you have to get parental consent. If no parental consent was acquired when you got married, your marriage can be annulled. But there's a time limit for that. You have to file the annulment within 5 years from the time of reaching the age of 21. So if that period lapses, or if
Di na siya pwede.
You no longer are able to find that or use that as a ground. Another ground is if either of the parties is of unsound mind or insane.
So psychologically
that's different. This one, unsound mind, is if a person is declared to be mentally ill or cannot really give consent properly. That's a ground.
Okay.
This ground actually has as an exception to the others. This does not have a time limit, but the person, once he has a lucid interval, meaning he suddenly acquires parang naintindihan na niya yung ginagawa niya.
Realizes.
In that case, pwede niyang ma-affirm na valid yung marriage nila. But during the time na unsound mind siya, the guardian can actually file a case for annulment on behalf of the person of unsound mind. And that's one ground. Another ground is when consent of either of the spouses was acquired through fraud. Fraud here means that hindi lang siya typical fraud eh. The fraud that we're talking about here is that one person, it's not as simple as
pretending to be someone else.
This goes into consent because one person suffers from a sexually transmissible disease and does not disclose it, or in the case of a woman, the woman does not disclose that she's actually pregnant from another person for getting married.
That's considered fraud.
So that's considered fraud, and within 5 years from the marriage, you can actually ask the court to declare the marriage annulled on that ground. Another ground is if the consent of either of the parties was acquired through force, intimidation. You were forced to agree to marry. So if that force, intimidation, undue influence has already stopped. So let's say you were threatened by, let's just say, it's just an example.
Situation.
A person was threatened by the family of the other side to get married, and he decided to get married. So that can be a ground for annulment. But again, there's a time limit. Once the force or the intimidation has ended, you have to file a case in court within 5 years. So if that lapses, wala na, that ground is gone.
For example, attorney, parang halimbawa na-abduct ako, tapos sinabi, pakasalan mo to, of course, na-coerced ako. Pero like, more than 5 years before ako naka-escape from my abductor. So paano yun?
Well, in that case, since you're still being abducted, you're still in that state that you could not file a case, the period to count 5 years has not started yet. So once you escape from your abductors, you can file already. So you have 5 years. I think 5 years is a long time for that situation. The reckoning period naman is not the judgment, but the filing of the case. So once you file the case, the period is already that is already satisfied.
Okay.
And then another ground is if one party is suffers from a serious sexually transmissible disease. So within 5 years from that, you can actually ask the court to annul you. And the last ground is if both parties or if either of the parties cannot consummate the marriage, meaning they cannot perform the sexual act, they have 5 years from the marriage to file for annulment.
Because as a married couple, parang part yun.
Yes,
parang role
the law
nila
recognizes
yun.
that you should live together and then give mutual help and support and love the other spouse.
Okay, mga kapuso. So far, binigay ni Attorney Abarquez kung ano yung mga grounds for annulment. So first, we have if you got married between 18 to 21, pwede mong i-argue yun. And then if mentally unsound ka, and then if you have a sexually transmitted disease, if hindi na consummate yung marriage within 5 years, and then
force, intimidation.
And fraud. Ayun. Okay. So in filing for annulment, attorney, do both parties have to agree?
Actually, that's a misconception. You don't have to agree. You just have one of the parties who wants to file for annulment must prove to the court that he or she has any of the grounds to file annulment. If both parties agree, that's going to be a problem. Under our current law, the parties are prohibited to agree to file a case for annulment. In fact, the court, there's actually a third party, no? Third party in a nullity case or an annulment case. There's the state. The state is actually represented in the case by usually a city prosecutor or a fiscal. And the fiscal, the role of the fiscal in a case for nullity or annulment is to check if the parties who are undergoing annulment actually agreed to file this case, no? Because
bawal yun.
Yes, the state.
Bawal yun.
That's against the principles of the state, that of the sanctity of the marriage. So technically, you cannot agree. You can agree on certain things, no? Like in nullity cases, usually the issues regarding custody of children if you have kids, or issues regarding the property relations of husband and wife. Those things can be threshed out by the parties. They can agree on those things. But as far as the ground for nullity, both parties cannot agree on that on grounds to nullify the marriage.
For legal separation, pwedeng mag-agree both parties?
Hindi rin
okay.
You just have to prove to the court that one party is able to show that the grounds for legal separation are present. Legal separation actually has many grounds. There are actually 10. Some of these, I just mentioned some of these kasi I guess the most typical one is repeated physical violence by one spouse done to the other or to the children of the other spouse. So that's one. Another case is when the other party engages in sexual perversion, or the other party is a homosexual or a lesbian. That can be a ground for legal separation. Or alcoholism, drug addiction. Usually the common element of these grounds for legal separation is that the acts or the grounds that you can use to ask the court to declare the parties legally separated occur after the marriage. So if any of these acts occurred before the marriage, it's not a ground for legal separation. It has to be after the marriage.
So if for example, I marry someone who is gay, pero before I married him, alam ko naman na, so di ko pwede yun gamitin.
For legal separation?
Yeah.
Well, technically,
because I knew it before,
before
getting married.
You see, I guess at the time when the family code was drafted in the 80s, I guess at the time there was still this idea that homosexuality or lesbianism is a choice, no?
Yeah.
That you were not born with it. But I guess scientific studies have shown recently that these individuals actually experience or actually are born with it.
Yes, it's not a choice.
That's why there's actually this ground that I mentioned earlier to declare a marriage void from the beginning. It's not just legal separation. The ground for psychological incapacity. Now, that particular ground was crafted by the framers of the family code. I guess as a go-between, no? Because at the time, they did not want to have absolute divorce in the Philippines. So as a go-between, they included this in the provisions of the family code, which was actually adopted from canon law from the church, because the church recognizes that in marriages where the spouses are no longer compatible psychologically with each other, or one party psychologically incapacitated to fulfill his essential marital obligations, then their marriage can be declared void. So you mentioned earlier that if you got married to somebody who was homosexual, you can actually use it as a ground, provided the psychologist is able to show that ground for homosexuality is a psychological condition and existed prior to the marriage. Then I believe you can use it as a ground to declare your marriage void by the courts.
Okay, so for other grounds for legal separation, you can find it naman sa Family Code of the Philippines. You can access it actually sa internet. Okay, pero can you walk us through the process of annulment, attorney? As in, from the moment na halimbawa ako, I consult a lawyer, okay, what goes after that?
Well, as a lawyer,
Okay.
of course, I would need the client to explain to me what are her grounds, what are your grounds. So we have to find out if your grounds are sufficient to file a case for declaration of nullity of marriage, or if it's a ground for annulment or just legal separation. Of course, I need to find those grounds so that I can advise my clients properly.
Yes.
Because there are some people who think that because binubugbog sila ng asawa nila, pwede na silang
For annulment.
annulment. But currently, that in itself is only a ground for legal separation,
Yes.
not declaration of nullity of marriage. Now, after finding out the grounds, magpe-prepare ngayon ng complaint. The complaint is filed in court. Magbabayad ka ngayon ng filing fees with the court, and that after the case is filed in court, the court would then raffle the case to at the handling court and notify the other party or the spouse regarding the case. And usually after that, the other party, once they receive the complaint, they will file their answer to it. So after that answer is filed, the court would ask the parties to appear before them for preliminary conference or pre-trial. And once that is done, then trial will proceed. After trial, both sides will present their case, the court will decide, and that's when the judgment comes in.
Okay. So actually, so magko-consult muna ako with a lawyer, and then yung spouse ko ay, of course, dapat may lawyer din siya, and then mag-reply siya so kung ano man yung nakita kong grounds
usually,
for...
right now, since wala kasi, under the law, no, there is no ground where both parties can file the case together. So usually, it's just one party consulting another. Usually, there may be an agreement, as I mentioned earlier, the parties can agree as to custody of children or the division of property. That can be agreed upon. But all the other aspects, the existence of the grounds for nullity or legal separation or annulment, that cannot be agreed upon by the parties.
Yes,
So,
kailangan parang...
so it's the court who has to decide that.
May respondent and then may parang...
May complainant, petitioner.
complainant. Yes. Okay. So actually, kukuha naman po tayo ng tanong from tanong ng bayan. Okay? Because yung mga viewers natin, of course, may mga tanong din naman sila. Okay.
Magkano po ang magagastos kung sakasakaling annulment?
Ayun, so attorney, ang tanong ng bayan, magkano po ang gastos sa annulment?
Well, it really depends, no, on the lawyer that they usually hire. But there are lawyers who charge per hour. There are lawyers who actually charge based on appearance and based on acceptance fees and per pleading. But that usually it might cost you around 200,000 to 400,000, 500,000. It's a wide range because it really depends. The reason why there are some cases where the cost is cheaper, these are cases where both parties are not very adversarial, meaning they don't really contest everything. But in cases where the parties in the case are very adversarial, they contest everything, little things like the custody of children, the division of properties. It may take longer.
Mas tatagal.
The court has to discuss these issues, settle these issues. So it's easier in a sense if when you file a case for nullity, if the parties already have some sort of agreement as far as the custody of children and the division of properties, then it becomes much faster and easier.
Yung sa 200,000 to 400,000, lawyer's fee pa lang or pati yung mga, papers na kailangan?
That actually is lawyer's fees as far as the filings in court and appearances. I think you can already include there the filing fee. But the filing fees actually may be higher if there are a lot of properties involved and disclosed to the court. But if there are none, then usually it's just a not very expensive filing fee.
So, if the couple can't afford a lawyer, can they be provided one?
You can actually consult. There are public attorneys that are available
So, pwede.
in all the courts. No? You can go to the public attorney's office and you can get a consultation from them. They have the public attorney's office. I'm not very familiar with their vetting process, but usually they would verify if you are really incapable of hiring your own lawyer. If you are, if they are able to prove, or they are satisfied by your proof that you cannot afford a lawyer, they would take on your case.
Okay. So, actually, attorney, may isa pa tayong question na galing sa tanong ng bayan. So, panoorin natin ito.
Okay.
How long does the annulment process usually take?
So, ayun, attorney, ang question po ay how long does the annulment usually take? Yung process?
Yes. Again, I cannot give you a definite answer because it really depends on the circumstances. As I mentioned earlier, if there are issues like custody of children and the division of property which are unresolved or not agreed upon by the parties, the case will take longer.
Pero in
the
years,
fastest I probably handled, it was finished in less than 2 years. The main case itself, the judgment. But again, I mentioned earlier that there's a third party in nullity cases or annulment cases, which is the state. If the state wants to appeal your case, they can do so. The Solicitor General's office can actually file an appeal of the judgment if they feel that the judgment is not correct. They can appeal it to the Court of Appeal. So there's that X factor also. So if the Solicitor General's office will not appeal the case, then the case becomes final, and you just have to go through the process of registering the final judgment in the Civil Registrar's office. Then once you do that, you can actually get married again if you want to.
Okay. Pero what are the chances that the annulment will be denied?
Well, in my experience, I've rarely seen cases where the court does not grant nullity cases. Because usually, when both parties file their case, they're usually able to prove it. The grounds are pretty how should I say it? Pretty easy to prove so long as you have the grounds. And besides, usually when you file a case for nullity, you don't file a case without the ground because it will be dismissed by the court immediately. So long as the court is satisfied that any of these grounds are present, the court would not deny it. They would grant the decision.
Yun nga lang, di ka sure kung how long,
Yeah,
diba?
and the process
But most
will
likely,
takes a while.
mag-grant naman if may grounds kayo. Okay. So, when it comes to it being contested po, how long, so matagal ulit yun pag kinontest mo yung result?
Contested? Well, yes. Let's say the judgment is rendered by the court and either of the parties or the state would file an appeal, then that would go to the higher court already. So the case is handled by the regional trial court. If you appeal it, it goes to the Court of Appeals. In the Court of Appeals, the court would require you to submit pleadings before them. Usually, there's they call it an appellate's brief. Once you file the appeal, the Court of Appeals would require you to file that and then require the other party to file their brief as well. And then, from there, the court would issue a resolution that the case is submitted for decision or may ask the parties to file a memoranda. So once that is issued by the Court of Appeals, then they will decide the case. That would, again, the period or the time frame from the time the appeal is filed up to the time the Court of Appeals decides the case, there's no fixed time frame. It may take maybe months to years actually.
But at least, it's possible to contest it naman.
Yes, it is possible.
Ayun. Okay po. You've mentioned kasi the grounds for the annulment, but there are cases kasi na, for example, abusive relationship. Pero of course, baka they wanna get remarried again. So, may chance ba na makonsider yung abusive relationship as a ground for annulment?
Well, currently, it cannot be, there's no ground for annulment for those abusive relationships. Unfortunately, that's how the law was drafted, so we cannot do anything about it. But I mentioned earlier the ground called psychological incapacity. If you use that as a ground to declare your marriage void because of the failure of the other party to fulfill their essential marital obligations. You see, the essential marital obligations actually means that you have to render or give mutual love, support to your family member, to your spouse, to your children. So that goes against it. That goes against being abusive. Being violent goes against that. Now, what you need to establish, if you use this as a ground, is that this condition is existing at the time of the marriage. So that's why you need an expert. Usually, you hire a psychologist to look at the psychological makeup of the party that you're saying is psychologically incapacitated, and then they would make a clinical ruling, a clinical assessment basically, that the person suffers from some sort of
because if nag-result sa violent behavior, baka chances are
it may have started from childhood or before the marriage. So long as the psychologist is able to show that, then that can be used as a ground to declare the marriage void. But yes, it's a tedious process. It takes a while to get a case like that resolved as well. So it's not as quick as people think it is.
Okay, so in your experience po, what are the usual reasons why people get annulled?
Well, you mentioned abusive husbands, or abusive wives. That is a typical reason, or usually, again, what we advise for clients, we just tell them that that particular ground in itself is not a ground for having the marriage annulled. It's actually a ground to have the marriage declared, or the parties declared legally separated. But that's why we ask them to consult a psychologist, so that the psychologist can come up with a physical makeup, and then when they come up with it and they find out that the individual is suffering from that condition before the marriage, then you can use it now as a ground to declare marriage void.
Okay, so how long naman po can you remarry? For example, na-annulled na. So, paano, how soon? Tomorrow ba? The day after I get the result, pwede na akong magpakasal ulit?
Well, you actually have to follow certain steps. No? There are certain requirements. It's actually procedural requirements. Once you get a judgment declaring your marriage void or annulled, you have to follow certain steps. You have to wait for the decision to become final. It has to be final so that the case can no longer be appealed by either the state or the other party. Once there's a certificate of finality already issued by the court, you have to go through the process of having the decision registered with the Civil Register's Office. Once it's registered, then you can already
yun na talaga, yung parang freedom.
The time frame of doing that actually really depends, no? If the court is quick in issuing the certificate of finality, and then the Civil Register is able to process the registration of the decision quick enough, then you should be able to remarry. Actually, the problems that we've encountered as regards the procedural aspect of registering the marriage, because usually you have to get when you want to remarry, you have to get a marriage license.
Again.
And when you get a marriage license, one of the requirements is this thing they call the CENOMAR, Certificate of No Marriage.
Oh, yeah.
So if your judgment declaring your marriage annulled is not registered with the Civil Register and forwarded to the PSA, the Philippine Statistics Office, then if you ask for a CENOMAR, it will say you're married.
Yeah.
So you cannot apply for a marriage license. So that's why that process is needed. Once that is forwarded, exactly, para siyang clearance. Once it's processed, and the PSA, the Philippine Statistics Authority, now has the record that the decision is registered, they can now issue us a certificate of no marriage, showing that yes, there was a previous marriage, but it's already been annulled by so-and-so judgment.
Okay, so since we're talking about getting remarried naman, baka this time, we should consider prenups. Is it advisable?
Well, prenuptial agreement actually, it does not cover grounds for nullity or grounds for annulment. Usually what prenup agreements cover is the agreement of the parties as far as their properties are concerned. Because when you marry here in the Philippines, the default property regime or property relations between the husband and the wife is what they call absolute community of property. It means that all the assets of the husband prior to and after the marriage and the assets of the wife prior to and after the marriage form part of the properties of the spouses. And 50-50 sila doon. So, parang walang lugi, 50-50 kayo sa lahat ng the pool of assets. Now, what a prenup does is the parties can agree not to set your property regime to that default regime, which is the absolute community property. The parties can agree to have their property relations to be conjugal partnership of gains. Simply it means that whatever I own or whatever the husband or whatever the wife owns before the marriage is his, and what you put in the marriage basically is what you acquire, what you contribute after the marriage. So you still keep properties for yourself. And then there's another regime called complete separation of property. So you can agree on these things in the prenup.
And it makes it easier if sakaling in the future nga you get annulled, no? Kasi so you don't have to talk about properties.
Yes, you remembered. So you're right. If there's a nullity case and there's a prenup, you just need to present that before.
And then passed.
They won't have to talk about it. That issue would no longer be an issue in court.
But if wala kayong prenup, so paano yung legalities ng paghahati ng properties? So magkakagulo na?
Ideally, it's 50-50, no? But really, it depends on the parties. That's why when you go to court, pinag-uusapan yan. Kaya I mentioned the case might take longer if the parties have a lot of assets. You see, I mentioned earlier that when you have an absolute community of property regime, everything you own before and after the marriage goes to the marriage. There are exceptions. So, example, may exceptions on like those that you acquired, property that you acquired through inheritance, is excluded. So, may mga ganun na mga bagay na pwedeng i-contest during nullity proceeding. You have to prove that this particular property is part of the property regime or not. But to make it simpler, the parties should agree, then it will be easier.
Paano if namatay naman yung spouse, tapos may other family pala yung namatay na spouse? So paano yung andar ng properties ng inheritance?
Okay, well, that's covered by our law on succession. Usually, when that is the case, the rule is that if a person dies and that person has several families, no? Maybe he had a first family and then he remarried because na-annul yung first marriage or namatay yung first spouse niya, ganun. It becomes more complicated because you have to determine the properties acquired before the second marriage, because technically all the properties before the second marriage is part of the property regime of the first marriage, and the children there are entitled to those properties. Now, the properties that were acquired technically after the second marriage are supposed to be inherited by not only by the children in the second marriage but also in the first marriage. There's that complicated matter. So that's why yes, when that happens, usually it is better before you remarry, you already try and distribute the assets to your children as parang advances to their inheritance to make it easier.
Pero paano if hindi po siya within wedlock, like illegitimate child? May laban ba yung illegitimate
Meron
child?
naman, yes. Illegitimate children actually have rights to inheritance as well. But they are treated, their share
I'll just speak in general terms here.
Okay.
An illegitimate child actually gets one half the share of a legitimate child in the inheritance. So whatever share that legitimate child gets, you just get half of that. But there's actually there's a combination that the law actually looks into, because it depends, no, if there are a lot of children, a lot of illegitimate children, tapos isa lang. Let's say, for example, there's only one legitimate child, and then there are 3 illegitimate children. So, parang ang paghahatian na lang nung illegitimate children, yung isang parte na maliit, hindi na technically one half yung makukuha niya. Pwedeng mas maliit.
Okay, so last na lang po na question sa children. For custody naman.
Okay.
When they get separated or annulled, so who decides?
Well, the law actually has a default rule. As a rule, if the child is below 7, it automatically goes to the children. Technically should go to the wife or to the mother. Of course, when the child is older than 7, you have to talk to them. You have to ask them who they want to go with, no? And that has bearing. So if they're older, if they're more than 7 years old, usually the court would ask the children. Usually there's some sort of proceeding where the court would determine, so that he will know that who will have custody over the child.
What if yung child gusto niya sa mom niya, pero mas financially capable yung dad? So, paano yun?
Well, pwede naman. Actually, part of the decision in a nullity case, I mentioned, is the distribution of properties. Also, part of it is the support of the children, especially if the children are minor children or those who are still in school. So, support is still supposed to be answered by both parents, no? So, if one parent is more financially capable, then he should support the child for his schooling, his needs, basically. So you can ask that from the court. And support actually is not it cannot be fixed. When the court says that you're entitled to 20,000 now, it does not mean that 10 years from now you'll ask. You cannot change it. Support can change depending on the needs of the kid.
You can appeal naman pag hindi mo na afford.
Technically, it's not an appeal, but you just ask the court. You just have to prove that my son or my kid already needs more support from the other party because of following things. Then the court will be able to grant that. It can change.
Attorney, na pag-usapan natin yung 3 ways nga para ng legalidad ng paghihiwalay na mag-asawa. We have legal separation,
Yes.
We have annulment, and then declaration of nullity of marriage. But of course, maingay rin ang kampanya right now sa divorce. So pasadahan lang natin kung ano ba yung difference ng divorce dun sa tatlong ways.
Well, actually, there's already a House bill and a Senate bill for divorce now, no? So, divorce actually is different from the 3 other grounds we discussed, because in divorce, there's actually this typical ground they call no fault ground, meaning the parties can actually file for divorce without any ground. They just say in their complaint or their petition that there are irreconcilable differences, or there's irreparable damage in the marriage. So the peculiarity of that is that in the other grounds, you have to establish that these are present. But with the no-fault ground, you just have to tell the court that we don't want to be married anymore.
Pwede kayong mag-agree this time.
Yes,
kasi sa
technically you can. In the House bill actually that was proposed and the Senate bill, the new things that are in those bill that is not in the current family law is that the parties, when your ground is the no-fault ground, you can actually file together. You can file jointly that you want to have a divorce. And in such a case, actually, you can also have it, the proceedings is actually a summary procedure, not a regular court proceeding where the parties need to present cases, usually summary proceedings cases just require the parties to file affidavits and then the court will decide based on that. So it's faster.
It's faster. Is it cheaper?
Definitely, because in that case, it's just a preparation of paperwork. It's all paperwork submitted to the court, and then there's not a lot of appearances, and the court will decide based on that.
So, for it to be a law, kailangan mapasa sa Senate?
Yes, it has to go through through Congress, to the House, to the Senate, and then signed into law. Once approved by Congress and the Senate, it has to be signed into law by the President.
By the President. Ayun. Thank you so much, Attorney Abarquez, for being with us and answering all the questions related to annulment, separation, and ayun, pasada sa divorce. But if may questions pa yung mga kapuso viewers natin to you specifically, how can they reach you?
Well, they can reach us through our law office. I am the managing partner of Pasig, Abarquez, Lumawig Law Offices.
Yes.
And our office is in Makati, along Amorsolo. You can also visit our website, www.val.law, if you have questions or queries.
Yan. Again, thank you so much, Attorney. Mga kapuso, maraming salamat po sa pagtutok. Para sa iba pang malalaking balita, i-follow lamang aming social media accounts at GMA News. At bisitahin din ang gmanews.tv para sa iba pang latest na balita. Again, maraming salamat po sa pagtutok.